So it's a long deck, so I'm just going to start off on this amazing journey of the Cham civilization. And to me, I start with this very favorite inscription of King Bhadravarman, who created one of the earliest Hindu temples of Vietnam. And he says, out of compassion for me, don't destroy my gifts, which is very apt in today's world. And Bhadravarman created this edifice for Shiva as Bhadreshwara. So before we start, some credits and acknowledgements. Of course, these sites were heavily bombed. So some of the sites that you're going to see today no longer exist. So we've tried to recreate them from old French excavation photographs and the work of Parmentier, uh, MC Paris, Codes, and all that. We're going to credit them. Bulk of the artifacts have survived, are currently in the National Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, the Cham Museum Sculpture in Da Nang, in central Vietnam, and of course, the museum in Hanoi. These sites were visited during the course of my work. So some of them are very interior portions of Vietnam, very hard to access. So unfortunately, the Cham artifacts have not got the kind of fame and scholarly reading as, for example, the Khmer civilization. So a credit to the wisdom of the ancient sculptors, and whatever you see is the work of some amazing archaeologists who, along with Parmentier and Aimonia, did pioneering work in Vietnam. We are going to see not just temples, we're going to see iconography, a little bit of scripts, though I'm not an expert in scripts. The Cham civilization, there are very few people left, and they share striking similarities with the Indic culture. So this, for example, is from one of their site museums where they exhibit the traditional attire of the Cham people, which is very familiar with us, the coinage, the earring, the bangles. So there's a lot for us to understand and study. So I wish young students of archaeology pick up an interest in the Cham civilization. There's a lot more to be explored and highlighted to come out. Some very interesting artifacts like this token pendant with the Nandi book. A lot of these artifacts are basically displayed in museums without context. So I believe that a lot more research can be done. These are, for example, brass drums, which are very, very old. These are possibly the oldest brass exhibits that we see in the Cham. But what interested me was when we were in outskirts of Ho Chi Minh, it's a small island called the Monkey Island. And in that Monkey Island, which was it's about 40 kilometers away from Ho Chi Minh City, we found this very small site museum with this burial urn. So, coming from Tamil Nadu, we see a lot of these Mudumakkal Tari. And to see this in Vietnam was quite surprising, and to see the synchronization that we have. So this was something that is still unexplored, the connect and how the elderly were buried in burial urns, very, very similar to what we see in South India to this day. So this burial jar was dated to 2500 to 2000 years ago. So not much research has been done on these aspects as well. Of course, we will see a lot of these similarities. I want to just show this one because anybody who's familiar with Chola sculptures will see this warrior emerging out of a Magara mouth. This is again a common motive that we will see in Vietnam as a exterior archaeological decoration of Champa temples. Elephants, again, coming from Chennai, talking to you from Chennai today. The Pallava sculptors' mastery over the elephants, and these are a few of the Cham equivalents. And you can see that they too seem to have a fascination for elephant in sculpture. And lastly, the main hero of the Cham civilization, which is predominantly Shaivid. You can see this fluted, of course, the traditional linga with its three parts. We see, so you will see me in the presentation many places, not for any publicity, but as a size representation. You can actually see how big these lingas are, and we see them spread all over south and central Vietnam. A lot of these steels are also there, still as we will see them in a while. Very, very important still as in central Vietnam, which have been uh, uh, preserved to this day. And this particular one from Mison I wanted to highlight is because the original temples were made of brick, and then they were covered with gold and silver by King Naravarman, which is very similar to our South Indian culture of Ponmai Vetan. So similar parallels were seen, and the dates is very interesting. 731 Common Era. So around the same time, our temples were converted to maybe granite edifices. Similar activity was going on in central Vietnam as well, and they also had the habit of coating them with, gilding them with gold. Well, in terms of heritage awareness, a lot of them were lost. These were swamped by forests, and this was the condition in which, when the French arrived in the early 1900s, first the French soldier named MC Paris chanced across the site, and later, about 2 years later, Finot led an expedition, and you can actually see from the pictures the conditions that they had to endure to visit these sites. Bulk of today's presentation is credit to this pioneering team, which explores these sites because, as I explained to you, they were bombed later during the American-Vietnamese War. A great debt to Parmentier, excellent archaeologist and cartographer. So he actually sketched a lot of temple towers and vimanas and gopras, which are very, very instrumental to our studies now. Plus, he also did an excellent photography as well. And a lot of these photographs yield vital clues because these sculptures have been dispersed around the globe. Okay, for starters, I know there'll be some early readers and watchers. This is where Vietnam is in that corner, and you can actually see the distance from India. So there was a sea route and there is a land route. So there are questions of who reached Vietnam first, how did they reach? We leave those questions open now. We don't want to speculate on them, but we just go into the actual site. So this is the black and white image that you're seeing is the olden Champa kingdom. And today, these names have been Vietnamized. So then the early names were very, very Indian sounding. So you have Amaravati, Vijaya, Katura, Panduranga, and all of them have modern day names. And they're spelled quite differently from how they are written. So I don't want to attempt calling them by their names, but they are spread across. So if you go to travel by road, this would take you about 17 hours to cover all these sites, just the distance. So they are quite well spread around, and it requires a lot of effort to find and visit these places. So sit right, and you're going to see some of these sites which are visited for you to enjoy. But what is actually interesting is there are two clans. So often when we talk about Tamil culture, we talk about the Pandyas, the Cholas, and the Cheras. So similarly, they had two different clans which always used to be fighting in Vietnam, Cham. And quite interestingly, one of them is called the Areca clan, the other one is a coconut clan. So basically, Areca is betel nut. So you had a betel nut clan and a coconut clan. So how they got these names is something that is not very clear. But then they seem to have clear boundaries. North was the Areca clan, and the south central were the coconut clans. The early region were heavily influenced by Shaivites, as we can see, and later there was a spread of Buddhism. We will see the developments in a while. And the Cham were perpetually at war with the Khmer. And I know if you've been to Angkor, you will see depictions of the Khmer defeat of the Cham. Of course, history is written by the victors, so we don't want to go in. Yeah, they had a blood enmity between the Cham and the Khmer. So these are, of course, the famous murals from Bayonne, where you see the actual battles on between the Cham and the Khmer. There are quite some very, very interesting iconographical differences. So a lot has been studied about the Khmer iconography, but strangely, the Vietnamese sculptures seem to have developed very unique set of iconometrics. For example, is this Roja? No, it's not the lady seated. It's it's the seat that she's seated on. So it seems to be some sort of pedestal. So this is something that's very classical, later day charm iconography. So instead of our linga pedestal that we normally see the yoni, we tend to see this form, which is noted in Vietnamese inscriptions as an uroja. It seems to be a sequel of breast, and this is where on top the main murtis are kept. And this is not specific only to linga. You will see that a lot more iconographic representations of gods, physical forms are also kept on this pedestal. So this is what is quite unique. So most of the charm sculptures, you will see this kind of a pedestal depiction. And in terms of descent, they talk. There's a lot of talk. There seems to be a sage who swam across, and then he marries a princess. So this tale we see quite around Southeast Asia. This tale of a seafarer, sage, or a warrior coming to marry a local princess is often repeated. But then they started calling themselves Burma. So this is basically, you will have Rudravarma, Bhadravarma, these names quite repeated. So this is how a linga pedestal on an uroja would look like. This is from the Hanoi Museum that you can see. And the top is actually gilded. So it actually has a small gold base on top of it. And you have a profusion of these lingas across, and they seem to have a fascination for gold. So, in fact, there are a couple of studies that you can look at in terms of temple consecration rituals, similar to what South Indian temple consecration rituals were there. They also seem to make these small animal figurines that were kept under the main god structures. So you see most of these in South India when you're consecrating the main deities, these token offerings will be kept. We find these are very similar parallels to the charm as well. The charm, unfortunately, a lot of it was destroyed because they had conflict coming down from Cambodia and also from mainland China. So a lot of these temples are ruined, and later they went through another bombing again. But just to give you an inclination of how these would have been extant, is this massive feat that you see. The photo doesn't do justice, but that's my hand. You can actually see how big this would have been when he was standing. And again, there also seems to be a fascination for Garuda, which seem to have gone across to Indonesia as well. So you see these huge Garuda images in the 10th century Common Era. So that's how big the Garuda sculptures are, unfortunately damaged. So we go into the piece that is the most important inscription, the Wokan inscription near Nachang, which is closer to Da Nang, about halfway away. It's about 8 hours drive from Ho Chi Minh. And this is possibly the earliest South Indian script, Sanskritized inscription in Southeast Asia, dated to around 340 CE. So this is a very, very important inscription because everybody, whenever we talk about Indic influence in Southeast Asia, we think about Cambodia, we think about Indonesia, Thailand, but actually this inscription predates any other known inscription by about 200 years. So the Wokan inscription is a very important inscription for scholars to study. I'm just putting this up. I'm not going into the content right now. Later, you can, I think it will be on YouTube for you to study and do it. There's a lot of research paperwork. You can actually look at this Southeast Asian review paper, which talks about the date of the Wokan stele. Another interesting artifact that helped me understand more about how or why South Indian shrines, early South Indian cave rock cut architecture do not have in situ murtis. We are normally told that possibly they held wooden mula murtis, which have not withstood the ravages of time. These are some of the earliest Buddha images in Vietnam, and they are made of wood. And surprisingly, they have survived, though in this condition. They are dated to around the 4th to the 6th, 7th centuries. So yes, wooden sculptures were there. They were worshipped, pure wood, and they did survive. So this is one of the examples. And just to show you how big they are, I'll come in the frame again. So this is how big these are. Almost life size wooden images. These are currently in the National Museum in Ho Chi Minh City. Another interesting, my favorite slab was this. This looks like a very nondescript slab, but it is the earliest reference to Valmiki's work. So basically, this talks about out of the anguish of the sage was born the divine verse. So not only did they know the Ramayana, they did know that when Valmiki saw the hunter hit the crown Shapakshi, and out of his hate sprung this epic. So they had such a deep understanding our epics, so much so that they actually inscribed that Valmiki got angry seeing the hunter kill one of the crown Shapakshis. So this is another interesting, and a lot of these inscriptions have been translated to French, but the next translation to English have not been done. So if you actually, if somebody is interested, there are publications exist in Vietnam about these translations into French. I feel they should be brought out into English. A few of them are currently underway, but I think you can do that. So this Ramayana seems to be very much infused into their culture. You can actually see the monkey army building a bridge, and these are inscribed as well. So you can actually see Vanarasena. You can actually read the script around the 9th centuries of the Vanarasena building the bridge. Of course, we have a parallel. So I'm just showing you a few parallels because this talk is going to feature majorly on Khmer, on the Cham, but I'm just showing you a parallel around the same time how our epics. This is basically the Ramayana that is in Bapuan, Greater Angkor. So this is another one in Bantey Serai in Cambodia. So a lot of these, our epic seems to have caught the attention of the sculptors. So that could be one of the ways where the Hinduism spread because we had all these interesting tales. For so linguistic experts, the schema of dates, they also follow the Saka era. So it's very easy to read the dates of these inscriptions. So they do follow the same Saka era like our. This is the evolution of the charm script. Uh, I think this is need to be relooked in terms of whether it actually evolved from Pallava Grantha, but again, this is something that I leave it to the scholars to talk about. Some of the very common motifs again that we see quite repeated are again Krishna Lila. This is a beautiful depiction of a ceiling lintel slab of the Govardhana panel. And you can actually see this oft repeated in many, just to compare. So this is a Vietnamese depiction, this is a Cham depiction in Angkor. So they had common motives among these two. So I'm just going to skip the Angkor part to come into the Cham. So this is an early linga. So here we don't see the Uroja concept. This we see a proper three parts of a linga, the Brahmapada, the Shivapada, and the Vishnupada. So this is quite often that you will see. But what is interesting is some of these lingas seem to have started evolving a small face. Of course, this seems to be the starting of the Moga linga concept. And then later they protrude out, and then they also seem to have come up with mass or kavasas on top of the Mogalingas like this. So the Mogalinga would, this brass would fit on to the extension. So this is very charm Shiva with a very broad mustache, very thick mustache and eyebrows. And this is a very simple depiction. This we will visit where the site is. You can actually, this is actually a very clear Mukhalinga that has been Vietnamized. So I just put this up to be in line with Babu's topic, syncretism. So yeah, some of the early sculptures that I'm just going to throw up now are very interesting objects. This is again Vishnu with a Prayava Chakra dated roughly to the 6th and 7th centuries of the Common Era. We have a slightly later Vishnu in stone and in bronze. And what is interesting is how he holds the Shankha in his right hand and the conch in his, the discus in his right hand and the Shankha in his left hand. We also see these we will see when we go into the actual sites how these lintels were used. But here you can actually see a very nice and strange depiction of Brahma as Nabis are coming out, and maybe Brahma's weight is held by two of the ganas so that the lotus stalk doesn't fall down. So they're actually holding the two lotus stalks up. That's how this depiction is there. This was as it was excavated. You can actually see how Vishnu himself is now holding the stalk up so that Brahma can sit straight. This is currently in the Danang Museum of Sculpture. That's the size of the sculpture. This is another strange depiction of Mahishasuramardini or Vishnu Durga, as we will see it. And you can actually see Mahisha on the floor. This just to give you parallels, which we can see in Fonaga, we will see them in Indonesia. So there seems to be a very strong Devi cult as well, which we'll see when we go in more detail. Not just that, of course, we have these early depictions of Surya, Chandra in the 7th and 8th centuries, and some very interesting darling Ganeshas. So this is probably the earliest Ganesha that we see in Vietnam from the 7th and 8th centuries in stone. Gajalakshmi is another popular motif, and Shiva and Uma. This could have been looking at how Uma is shown kneeling on Shiva's thigh, could be part of a Ravana Anugraha Murthy sculpture, which is sadly defaced much. This is another very important bust of what is now considered to be Parvati, a masterpiece in Vietnamese Cham creation in hard granite. It's a slightly greenish granite, but you can actually see. What is interesting is the face normally of Devi is shown slightly looking down. Here she is up, and you can actually see a very proud tilt of the face. And so there are interpretations that she could be a queen or Parvati. Rare depictions of Vishwakarmas, we do have also Balarama, so we'll see quite a number of them. Here you see Balarama, and of course, a lot of court dancers, some very interesting dancing women, dance musicians. So obviously, it was not just temples and our epics. They also imbibed a lot of our synthetic culture in terms of dancing, what musicians, drummers, cymbal players, and all that. So that's the preview part of it. Now we go into the main part of the presentation, which is how do we classify sites? Normally, I've tried to base them based on the provinces, so that if any of you want to visit, you would go down in this route. So basically, you see bulk of them in these 8 provinces. Most of them are ruined, so take a pinch of salt. You could travel 3-4 hours just to see a brick kiln. So let's see. For me, the most beautiful one is the Punaga in Nachang. It's a beautiful seaside location. It's almost like a resort now. But bang in the middle of the city is this beautiful temple on a small mountain. And what is interesting is this was the preceding deity was Bhagavati. So they say that this Bhagavati was made entirely of gold. And one time, seafaring robbers came and stole the gold Bhagavati in the 9th century, and the king actually made another replica. So what you see now, so as you enter up, you actually see Mahamandapa, which currently has just these pillars. And then as you go up, you have this beautiful row of steps that lead you up the temple. And then you have this magnificent pure brick structure. And for viewers from Orissa, you will see the parallel. So most of the extant charm brick temples have a very strong connect to Orissan architecture and not much of South Indian architecture. So I would say that I leave it for you to interpret it. And most of these brick sculptures had this granite door jambs, and top of it will be this ceiling lintel, and that's where the main sculptures come up. And this is actually a beautiful depiction of Mahishasuramardini, but the locals call her as Bhagavati. This is how she is worshipped to this day. Locals are worshipping. This used to be inside the main sanctum. This linga is currently moved to the National Museum in Hanoi. This is actually the depiction where he talks about the deity. So this inscription basically talks about there was a linga that was erected, and then a new deity of Bhagavati was made in stone, replacing the one made of gold in 918 CE. This was the theft of the gold statue in Ponagar. So it has been heavily restored. But it's beautifully done. So there are basically three towers, and inside you have some later day sculptures. So I'm not going. So these are very later day depiction of Shivalinga inside. Just to show you the inside shot of the Vimana, and you quickly see very parallels to South Indian temple architecture from the inside, but the outside brick structures are very unique for them. You also have this beautiful elephant rider. So you said Indra is something that we need to study more. So the next interesting one is the Fuhai towers from the 8th and 10th centuries, and each of them are between 20 and 24 meters. So these are not small constructions. So these are very tall constructions. So they are currently under renovation. So one of them is renovated, and they've used the original conservation materials. So that's how the Pohai towers look like, and most of them have later day replacement. This is one of the original lingas that is still there, and these lingas seem to be made of a greenish granite. Most of them have this greenish granite. This is Holai. Holai is not as protected as others, just off the road of the 8th century. Again, tall towers, but all the main inside icons have been removed. So you can just see the architecture, very beautifully done brick structures of them. Interestingly, the tiles that are there are squarish, which are very reminiscent to the early Chola brick sites that we see, for example, in the Chola lighthouse. Now you can see it. Polai is again one of the tallest stars. So I'm just going to run through some of them, which don't have any icons. So I'm just going to show you how they are. This is Bangan. Bangan is slightly later, between the 9th and 10th centuries, but it had a very unique structure of a capstone. So this is Parmantius' sketch where he sketched how it would have looked. And inside, you can actually see from the inside how an octagonal structure goes up to form a cylindrical hamalka on the top. It has a beautiful shiveling, which is still there inside. And Topdai is very unique, again, very different. So each of them are very distinct. This looks like a modern day tar. So again, it's replay. It's got a modern day shiveling inside. And on the corner, you have these, so these makaras, you have these Garuda motifs. For want of time, I'm just moving on to the main side of Plangirai. This is again on a small hillock, but it's one of the most beautiful, well-maintained sites. It's slightly about 7 hours drive from Ho Chi Minh, and you can actually see it's a beautiful barrel-vaulted one of the Vimanas. So, and then you have the main tower and a very small shrine on the right. And this was the fighter after going over. So luckily they survived. And these are again Parmantier sketches. You can actually see how beautifully each of these multiple tiers are worked, and how the Vimana is actually leading into the main shrine. And for people who visited Dharmaraja, a lot of them seem to see a parallel between these two. Here you have this beautiful Shiva dancing in Chatura. Uh, and you have a lot of these that have been moved to museums. So some of them have been moved to museums. Inside, you have this amazing Nandi, and this is the one that I showed you in the front, the Mogaling. So you can actually see that he is under worship now, and you can actually go around him. So before, so the bulk of the work is actually limestone plaster work. that makes him look almost like a Vietnamese. But the actual linga, you can actually see the basic structure remains to this day. Although this was before bulk of the work was done. One is about 22 meters tall, one of the tallest structures. Tapnan again, it's closed now for renovation, similar to Pomai. So a lot of these stars. So I'm going to take you to the charm site. So I'm just running through these so that you can actually see how beautiful some of these works are. So I'll take another 20 minutes to dwell on the main site of Mison. Mison is like a sacred valley, is nestled into a row of small hills. Unfortunately, it was used by the Viet Cong rebels, and during the Vietnamese American War, this was heavily targeted. So we're going to use some of the old maps in the photographs. Some of them have still not been demined, so it's very risky to go off the path. There are clearly marked paths that you have to follow, and this is actually an impact bomb crater. So this is actually me there, standing next to a linga. So how was this site is something that we need to look at. Mison is slightly confusing because unlike South Indian temples, the Cham kings did not build on expanding a single temple. They seem to be adding shrines. So instead of just making one temple big, you see about 10, 20 temples inside the same complex. And then to date them is very difficult. So what the researchers have done, basically they have grouped by position. So you have group A to group K, and inside those groups you will have different dates. So if you go by clear dates, the earliest ones seem to be 7th century Common Era. We did talk about in the 4th century Bhadravarman creating, but he seems to have done the whole structure in wood. There was a fire, and then most of it was lost, and later it was converted to brick in the 7th and 8th centuries. So we will go as per the position grouping of group A to group C. This is how the charm site of Mison is currently classified, and we will be heavily using Parmantier's beautiful sketches. So this is Mison A, what we're going to see. So in A, you go to A1, which is possibly the tallest, which was possibly the tallest star. So that's A. And in whenever we see this sketch, we will also see impact craters come in. So what you're seeing here is on the left side, you see a star mark. And yeah, I'll show you this. So this one is an impact crater. So that's the problem in this site. So A1 was 24 meters tall, and this is the early photographs when the French were trying to restore it. And today, that's the temple. What's happened, fortunately, is the because of the bombing, the tower actually fell out, and you can actually this is how it looked like. And actually, if you go in, you can actually see. So this is how Parmantier visualized it. I'm just comparing it with the big temple to show how the Vimana would have looked from the inside. Very similar, and you can actually see this is actually how it was when it was in the early 19th century. So today, the linga alone exists, so linga still stands. And as you go in to the entrance, you can actually see the linga pida, massive linga pida that is still there inside the Garbhagriha, still extant, and that's how tall it would have been. A10 was another site that's totally gone. It's reduced to a mound now. So the ship, so the capstone actually survived, and it is now kept in the site museum. And it actually has a 6th century Sanskrit inscription. A12 and 13 are again completely ruined and gone. They've fallen down. The massive door jambs are there. again, most of the A. So A is completely hit. B and C have a B, C, and D are little bit so they survived a bit. So let's see how they survived and how they stand. So B1, as you can see, was a direct hit by a bomb. This was Parmantia's sketch as he was excavating it, and today this is how it stands. As you walk up to B1, you can actually see the shivling there. And what is interesting is, as you walk in, the door jam seemed to have this beautiful inscription, uh, uh, inscriptions which you can read. And this linga is actually very beautiful mapping. Actually, see, this is how big the linga is. Uh, they try to reconstruct it, but not enough parts were salvaged. So a B1 is currently in this one. Recently, you would have seen about a year ago, there was another linga that was excavated and found, which is very similar to this. So this was buried and was saved. So this was discovered by ASI, I think, about 2 years ago, 1 year ago. B2 to B6, most of them are temples for subsidiary shrines. So we'll see who these shrines are. Fortunately, bulk of them, the main deities were taken away. So this is from inside the B3, and I just wanted to compare this with temples in South India. So this is in Muvarkoil, Vedal, the Apsidal shrine. Just and this is of course the big temple from the inside. So B3 actually houses this remarkable Ganesha. This is one of my favorite Ganesha sculptures from the Cham, 7th and 8th century. I actually call him the Chris Gale Ganesha. So you'll see why I call him the Chris Gale Ganesha. So he's now in the Danang Museum of Sculpture. A beautiful Ganesha. On the front, he looks, so he has this Naga Yagnopavida, which is very interesting. He has a snake, he wears his Yagnopavida. And on the back, he actually has braided hair. So you can actually see beautiful braided hair that he has. And then we go to V4. V4 had this remarkable sculpture of Kartikeya on astride on a peacock. And you can actually see, as I told you, most of the charm sculptures seem to have the central deities placed on a pedestal. So not just Shivalinga had this pedestal, almost all the sculptures. Sadly, when this was moved to the museum, in the museum there was a theft and robbers actually cut off the face of the Skanda. So we are still searching for his face. We don't know. It's still not surfaced for the last 40 years. B5 again. So what's happened is that these brick, after they laid the brick, they seem to have carved it. So these are carved on designs and figurines carved on the basic brick wall. This is the barrel wall from the inside. You can actually see what was inside. We have these small, like a bathtub, maybe for annealing oil. We see similar structures. So I just wanted to put this in comparison. This is from the National Museum in Jakarta. And this is, of course, in the big temple. A lot of people say it's the bathtub of Raja and all that, which is fake. It's so the mouth is so small. I think he can only dip his finger in this. Okay, let's look at this interesting basic inscription, which is so what happens is most of these steels were found next to, so unlike our temples where, which are made of stone, where the plinth would have inscriptions, in the Cham, the king erected this stela with his endowment inscriptions. Just move aside to Mason Group C, which is another interesting set because Group C houses some of the very beautiful lintel works. So this was a beautiful Natesa that was part of C1 and is currently kept in the site museum. You can actually see it's got big damage, but what is interesting is you can actually see Karekal Amayar dancing. So when you go near, you can actually see her in gay abandon. She's dancing, and that's how the lintel is to this day. There's another interesting panel which we will see, which I'm just skip on for want of time to Group B. Brickworks, for interested in Brick Temple architecture, this is a beautiful place to go. But there are a lot of these loose sculptures with Parmentier actually took photographs of, and one of them is this beautiful Shiva. You can actually see, as I told you, the Cham Shiva, braided hair, thick mustache, the, the long ears, descended ear lobes, and they would used to be having a, a, a fitting that will go into the pedestal. And this is another icon in Garuda. Sadly, the face is gone, but he still exists to this day. And you can actually see his Naga Vandana on both sides. And just to compare a Pandyan Garuda that is currently in the Metropolitan Museum, so just to show the seated posture of Garuda. So it's very, very clearly that he is Garuda. Later day, the charm also seemed to have become very artistic, and there seem to be these kind of depictions for Garuda that comes up in the later day. Shiva standing, very rarely we used to see it in South India, but it seems to be a very common motif. And just to show you the difference between a charm Shiva and a Khmer Shiva. So you can actually see the difference in iconography is very, very clear. The facial features are very different. So once you get to see a few of the charm art, you can actually clearly differentiate. So a lot of them seem to think interchangeably, but no, the charm iconography is very, very unique and different from the Khmer iconography. We go to group G, again, something that's been restored right now. There are a few interesting sculptures there, and this is how, once they finish, this is the architect's view how it's going to be. Group H is something that's again gone a lot. So that's the brick that I talked to you about. For people who are searching on the brick, I'm not trying. So, and then you will have this dancing Shiva. Group E is again a total loss. Most of it was bombed. You don't see much of it, but this used to be the central the ceiling lintel of so it used to be in C1, and this altar is again from E1, just the altar. It's a very beautiful altar showing a flautist, a dancer, a lute player, and then somebody who's learning from a guru, uh, a tripod, somebody sitting at in profile facing into the sculpture. Very, very interesting depictions, very unique depictions. That's the main piece, which the French took, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. Currently in the Musée Guimet, you can actually see from E1. So lucky he was moved out to France. He sits there now. Vishnu on Garuda, who used to be in E1, E7, E4. All of them are gone. Again, I am just showing you these because this is how. Okay, E7 used to be Ganesha, and you can actually see this Ganesha currently in the in the Hanoi Museum. No, in the Da Nang Museum. This is another early depiction of Ganesha, which scholars are not clear what he holds in his hand. Is it a corn cob of the 7th century, which we can discuss later? So I'm just skipping to group F again because it's all gone. Okay, I'll just keep saying these. Very strange, unique depictions on charm. This Yaksha is very, very unique. This massive Shiva, you can actually see how big the Shiva is. That's my hand. So a lot of these strange depictions are there of Shiva as Vinadara, of a lentil, then this beautiful Ardhanarishwara, very, very similar to ones that we see in Kanchipuram, in Badami, in Kanchipuram again, in Malai. You can see this is in the Vedagrishwara temple. You can see similar depictions of him in many places. Natesa, as I said, there's a lot of Ramayana panels that we can see. And to me, the most unique panel that I have seen is this Ravana Anugraha Murthy that I'm going to show you now. We see a brilliant depictions in India of the multiple heads of Ravana. So to depict that in the charm, how did they do it? So this is sadly a very mutilated lintel But what has survived is this. So it was excavated, it was like this. And what is interesting is how you can actually, let me show you. So there's Ganesha on the drum, a small temple. And this is how the charm sculptor chose to show the multiple heads, like a paper art he has shown. So very, very unique handling of a very complex subject of Ravana's multiple heads. We can see, for example, in the charm, you can see how the heads are shown in a row. This is from Angkor. So you can, in Khmer art, Bantey Serai, you can actually see how the Khmer artist chose to show. This is not Ravana Murthy, this is Mara, the Buddhist art. So we just skip on to show some of the Buddhist depiction before we close out. So around the 9th and 10th century, there was a strong Buddhist influence, and you can see a lot of Buddhist influences. And this is again Charvet form. What is interesting is this is an inscribed sculpture. What happens is they seem to have, because of bulk of the structures were in brick, they've actually inscribed the donor inscription on the back of the main statue, and this statue was actually stolen from the museum, and it was kind of later returned after 30 years. So this is a very interesting depiction. We have a lot of these makara motifs which we see. I'll just show you this. This is another set of displaced musicians and craftsmen. One of them is currently in the Rydberg Museum. A lot of these beautiful depictions, very strange depictions that we see. Nandi seem to be very common. We see almost 30 Nandis if you go into the Hanoi Museum. There is a seated Devi on a very unique pedestal. And this pedestal, this Nandi pedestal has been a subject of many research theses, but has not yielded many returns. So I'll just show you what is in the Nandi pedestal so that you can see, maybe you can show you the main pedestal. Yeah, so this is what is baffled many experts. A lot of people are trying to find out what is depicted in this story. Still, they've not been able to decipher. So on all four sides, there are these miniature panels that are there. And so far, they have not been deciphered. And we have this beautiful dancing ones. Of course, the Ashtadik You have so almost the entire our pantheon of gods are there. This is this Buddhist tympanum that is there. That was again found. So what happened was there was very interesting a Chinese incursion that happened into Vietnam around the 9th century, and as akin to South Indian sculpture, this bronze were buried for safety. And about 50 years ago, when the villagers were digging, they found this amazing bronze Devi. So obviously, the villagers thought it was made of gold. So they cut the attributes. And what she held in her two hands was very interesting. So she has a third eye, and on her two hands, she held a lotus and a conch. So the villagers actually cut these two. So it's still a puzzle. So what they have done now is this research paper that I quote has called it Lakshmi Indra Lokeshwara. So it's still a puzzle for people who want to study about it. Please look up at the paper. So this is how the tympana, the main structure, the artist impression of how she would have been displayed in the temple with her two, if she held her two attributes intact. A lot of parallels. Anybody from Maharashtra, Pune would understand. We see similar such in the Baja caves depictions. So this is possibly the earliest depiction of polo in a panel. You can actually see them playing polo. And with that, I end this presentation. Maybe next time I get an opportunity, I can talk about the amazing Cambodian artifacts.